The wind howled across the frozen landscape like an angry beast. Snow and ice stretched in every direction as far as the eye could see. There was nothing here but white emptiness and bitter cold. This was the Siberian Arctic, one of the loneliest places on Earth. Dr. Una Park pulled her thick coat tighter around her body. She had been in cold places before, but this was different. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero, and even with all her protective gear, she could feel the cold trying to crawl into her bones. She looked at the small camp of orange tents behind her and wondered, not for the first time, why she had agreed to lead this expedition. Una was 34 years old and worked as a geophysicist for the Korean Polar Research Institute. Her job was to study the Earth, to understand what lay beneath the surface. For the past 3 weeks, her team had been drilling into the ancient ice, collecting samples that would tell them about Earth's climate thousands of years ago. It was important work, but it was also boring and exhausting. Her team was small. There was Dr. Junho Lee, a quiet man in his 40s who studied strange life forms that lived in extreme environments. He spent most of his time looking at samples through his microscope, searching for tiny creatures that could survive in the frozen ground. There was also Minyu Kang, a serious military officer who had been assigned to their expedition for reasons nobody fully understood. He was tall and strong, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He rarely smiled, but Una had learned to trust his judgment. On that particular morning, everything changed. Una was checking the drilling equipment when Junho came running toward her. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with something that looked like fear mixed with excitement. "You need to see this," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Right now." She followed him to the main research tent where their scanning equipment was set up. The machines were making sounds she had never heard before. On the screen, she saw something that made her heart stop. There was something buried beneath them, something big. The scanners showed a metallic object approximately 400 meters below the ice. It was not a natural formation. The shape was too perfect, too geometric. It stretched for almost 200 meters in length, like a giant arrow pointing toward the sky. "What is it?" Una whispered. "I don't know," Junho replied. "But it's not supposed to be there. Nothing like this should exist." Minyu joined them, his face showing no emotion as he studied the screen. "How old is the ice around it?" Una checked the data. Her hands were shaking, and it was not from the cold. "The ice layer, it dates back at least 65 million years." The words hung in the air like frozen ghosts. 65 million years. That was when the dinosaurs had died. That was before humans existed. That was before almost everything they knew had existed. "That's impossible," Junho said quietly. But the machines did not lie. Something had been buried in this ice since before the dawn of human history, and they had found it. Over the next few days, Una sent urgent messages to her superiors in Korea. She explained what they had found and she requested more resources. At first, people did not believe her. They thought there must be some mistake with the equipment. But when she sent them the raw data, the doubters went silent. Within 2 weeks, helicopters began arriving at their small camp. They brought more scientists, more equipment, and more soldiers. Una watched as her quiet research expedition transformed into something much bigger and much more serious. Among the new arrivals was Sujin Han, a structural engineer with a reputation for solving impossible problems. She was a small woman with short hair and quick hands, and she immediately took charge of the excavation planning. There was also Dr. Nari Choi, a linguist who specialized in ancient languages. Una did not understand why they needed a linguist, but she was too busy to ask questions. The drilling began in earnest. Massive machines cut through the ice, sending huge chunks of frozen water flying into the air. The work was slow and dangerous. Twice, the ice shifted unexpectedly, nearly burying workers alive. But they kept going, driven by the mystery that waited below. After 3 more weeks of digging, They finally saw it. The first glimpse came through a hole in the ice, barely wide enough for a person to look through. Yuna was the first to peer into the darkness below. She shone her flashlight down and saw something that made her forget how to breathe. It was black, perfectly, impossibly black. The surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The shape was smooth and curved, like nothing she had ever seen built by human hands. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually real." Word spread quickly through the camp. Everyone wanted to see. Scientists pushed against each other, trying to get a glimpse of the impossible object. You had to push people back and establish order before someone fell into the hole. That night nobody slept. They sat in the research tent, staring at images captured by the cameras they had lowered into the opening. The object was definitely a vehicle of some kind. It had what looked like wings or perhaps fins extending from a central body. There were no visible markings, no windows, no obvious doors. It just sat there, silent and patient, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Yuna looked at the faces around her. She saw fear, wonder, and excitement. She saw scientists who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe suddenly realize that the universe was much stranger than they had ever imagined. "What do we do now?" Nari asked. Before Yuna could answer, Minyu spoke. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had faced danger before and survived. "We keep this secret for now. We tell only the people who need to know, and then we find a way inside that thing." "Inside?" Junho looked horrified. "We don't even know what it is. We don't know if it's safe." "That's exactly why we need to look inside," Minyu replied. "Whatever this is, whatever it means, we need to understand it before anyone else does." Yuna knew he was right. This discovery would change everything. It would change science, history, religion, and politics. It would change how humans saw themselves in the universe. They could not simply walk away and pretend they had found nothing. She stood up and looked at her team. These were the people she trusted with her life. These were the people who would help her uncover the greatest mystery in human history. "We go inside," she said firmly. "We find out what this is. We find out why it's here, and we do it together." Outside the tent, the Arctic wind continued to howl. But inside, a group of humans prepared to take their first steps toward the stars. They did not know what waited for them in that ancient ship. They did not know that their discovery would reveal truths about the universe that would shake humanity to its core. They only knew that they had to try. And so, in the frozen heart of Siberia, the greatest adventure in human history began. 3 weeks passed, and they still could not get inside. Sujin tried everything she could think of. She used diamond-tipped drills that could cut through the hardest rock on Earth. The black surface of the ship remained untouched. She tried lasers that burned hot enough to melt steel. The ship absorbed the heat without even getting warm. She even tried explosives, small controlled charges that should have punched a hole through any material known to science. The ship did not even shake. "This is impossible," Sujin said one night, throwing her tools onto the ground in frustration. "No material should be this strong. No material should behave like this." Yuna understood her frustration. The entire team was tired and discouraged. They had uncovered the greatest discovery in human history, and now they were stuck outside like children pressing their faces against a locked window. Minyu kept them focused. He organized guard rotations and made sure everyone got enough food and rest. He also handled the growing pressure from governments around the world. Word of the discovery had leaked, and now everyone wanted a piece of it. American agents had tried to land helicopters at the site. Russian officials claimed the discovery belonged to them since it was found in Siberian territory. Chinese scientists demanded access. Minyu kept them all at bay, with a combination of diplomacy and veiled threats. "We found it," he told one angry general over the radio. "We will open it, and we will decide who gets to see what's inside." It was Nari who finally found the answer. She had been studying the ship's surface for days, looking for any kind of writing or symbols. At first, she found nothing. The black material seemed completely blank, but then she noticed something strange. When she touched certain spots on the surface, she felt a slight vibration beneath her fingertips. It was so faint that she almost missed it. She began mapping these vibration points. There were dozens of them scattered across the ship's hull. When she connected them with lines, a pattern emerged. It was not writing exactly. It was more like music frozen in space. "It responds to sound," she told Yuna excitedly. "I think the ship is listening for something." Sujin immediately began testing different sounds. She played music, spoke words in different languages, and generated pure tones at various frequencies. Nothing worked. The ship remained sealed. Then Junho had an idea. What if it's not listening for our sounds? What if it's listening for Earth sound? Everyone looked at him with confusion. "The Earth hums," he explained. "It produces a natural frequency called the Schumann resonance. It's about 7.83 Hertz. Every living thing on this planet has been bathed in that frequency for billions of years. Maybe the ship is tuned to recognize it." Sujin quickly set up equipment to generate the Schumann resonance. She aimed a sonic emitter at the ship's hull and pressed the button. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the black surface began to change. Lines of pale blue light appeared, spreading across the hull like cracks forming in ice. The light traced patterns that might have been writing, or might have been art, or might have been something humans had no words for. A deep humming sound filled the air, making everyone's bones vibrate. And then a door appeared. It did not open. It simply materialized as if it had always been there but invisible. The doorway was tall and narrow, at least 3 meters high, and it led into darkness. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all just stared at the impossible entrance before them. Yuna was the first to step forward. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She turned on her flashlight and aimed it into the darkness. The beam of light revealed a corridor that stretched deeper into the ship than she could see. "I'm going in," she said. "We're going in together," Minyu corrected her. He checked his weapon and nodded to the rest of the team. "Stay close, move slow, touch nothing." They entered in a single line. Yuna led the way, followed by Junho, Nari, Sujin, and finally Minyu at the rear. Their footsteps echoed in the strange corridor, making sounds that seemed too loud in the ancient silence. The first thing Yuna noticed was that the corridor was adjusting to them. As they walked, the walls seemed to shift and widen, creating more space for their human bodies. It was as if the ship was studying them and changing itself to make them comfortable. The second thing she noticed was the light. Panels on the walls began to glow with soft blue luminescence as they approached, then faded back to darkness after they passed. The ship was waking up, responding to their presence after millions of years of sleep. "This is incredible," Junho whispered. He reached out toward the wall but stopped himself before touching it. "The ship is alive. Not alive like a plant or animal, but aware. It knows we're here." They walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the vessel. Eventually, they emerged into a large circular chamber. Yuna's flashlight beam swept across the room, and she gasped. There were bodies everywhere. They lay on the floor, arranged in a perfect circle around a raised platform in the center of the room. There were at least 20 of them, and they were definitely not human. The creatures were huge, nearly 3 meters tall even lying down. Their skeletal remains showed bodies with 4 arms instead of 2. Their skulls were elongated, stretching back far beyond what any human skull could do. They had no visible eye sockets, but there were strange patterns of holes in their foreheads that might have served a similar purpose. "They died here," Nari said softly. "They all came to this room and died here together." "But why?" Sujin asked. There are no wounds, no signs of violence. What killed them? Nobody had an answer. Yuna approached the raised platform in the center of the room. The bodies were arranged to face it, as if they had been worshipping something or waiting for something to happen. On top of the platform sat a single object. It was a cube about the size of a human fist, made of some crystalline material that seemed to contain swirling colors inside. It pulsed with faint light, like a heart beating very slowly. "Don't touch it," Minyu warned. But Yuna felt drawn to it. She could not explain why, but she felt like the cube was calling to her, inviting her closer. She reached out her hand, ignoring the shouts of warning from her team. Her fingers touched the cool surface of the cube. The room exploded with light. Images filled the air around them, floating like ghosts made of pure color. They saw stars and planets and galaxies spinning in the darkness of space. They saw ships like this one sailing between the stars. They saw creatures of impossible shapes and sizes, living and dying across the vastness of the universe. And they saw a figure standing before them. It was one of the four-armed beings, but this one was different. It seemed to be made of light rather than flesh. It raised one of its four hands in what might have been a greeting, and it began to speak. The sounds it made were nothing like human language. There were clicks and whistles and deep rumbles that Yuna felt more than heard. But somehow, impossibly, she understood a single word. "Welcome." The image flickered and faded, leaving them in darkness once more. The cube stopped glowing and sat silent on its platform. Junho was the first to find his voice. "It was waiting for us. This whole time, for millions of years, it was waiting for someone to come and find it." Yuna looked at the bodies arranged around the platform. She looked at the cube that held secrets from across the stars. She looked at her team, these brave humans who had followed her into the unknown. "Then let's find out what it wants to tell us," she said. The answers, she knew, would change everything. But standing there in that ancient tomb, surrounded by creatures from another world, she felt something she had not expected. She felt hope. Whatever these beings had left behind, they had left it for a reason, and Yuna was determined to discover what that reason was. For 72 hours, Nari did not sleep. She sat in front of the glowing cube, surrounded by recording equipment and translation software. The alien figure appeared again and again, speaking in its strange language, and each time Nari listened with desperate concentration. She filled notebook after notebook with symbols and patterns, trying to find meaning in sounds that human ears were never meant to hear. The others took turns bringing her food and water. Junho stayed by her side the longest, fascinated by the challenge of communicating with a species so different from anything on Earth. He noticed things that Nari missed at first. "The colors," he said one night, pointing at the holographic figure. "Look at the colors on its body. They change when it speaks. The sounds and the colors work together." Nari stared at the image with new eyes. He was right. The alien's skin shifted through different shades of blue and purple and gold, creating patterns that matched the rhythm of its speech. It was not just speaking with sound. It was speaking with light. "There's more," Junho continued. He held up a device that measured electromagnetic radiation. "Every time it speaks, there's a pulse of energy, like a radio signal, 3 channels of communication happening at once: sound, light, and electromagnetic waves." Understanding came slowly, like the sun rising over a dark landscape. Nari and Junho worked together, building a translation system that could analyze all 3 channels at once. They made mistakes. They started over. They argued and apologized and kept working. On the 4th day, the first words became clear. "We are the Watchers," the alien figure said. The translation was rough and imperfect, but the meaning was unmistakable. "We have traveled the stars since before your son was born." Yuna gathered the entire team in the chamber. They sat in a circle, just like the dead aliens around them, and listened as Nari played the translated recordings. The Watchers, they learned, were ancient beyond imagining. They had emerged from a distant galaxy billions of years ago, when the universe was young. They had developed technology that let them live forever, travel faster than light, and reshape matter with their thoughts. But despite all their power, they had chosen a humble purpose. They watched. They traveled from world to world, studying the development of life. They cataloged every species they found, every planet with living creatures, every star that warmed a world. They believed that life was the universe's greatest treasure, and they dedicated themselves to understanding and protecting it. "We found your world," the figure continued, "when great beasts walked upon it, creatures with teeth like swords and feet that shook the ground. We watched them hunt and fight and die. We thought they might one day grow wise, but then the fire came from the sky and they were gone." The team exchanged glances. The Watchers had been here during the age of dinosaurs. They had witnessed the asteroid impact that destroyed them. "After the fire, we saw small creatures emerge from hiding. Weak and soft with no claws or armor, they should not have survived, but they did. They adapted, they grew, and we continued to watch." Nari paused the recording. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "What is it?" Yuna asked. "The next part," Nari said slowly, "is about something called the silence, and it's not good." She pressed play again. The holographic figure's colors shifted to deep, angry red. Its voice became lower, heavier, filled with something that sounded like fear. "The silence is not a creature. It is not a disease. It is more like a force, a presence that moves through the spaces between stars. It hunts minds. Wherever there is thought, wherever there is awareness, the silence eventually finds it, and when it finds it, it feeds." Images appeared around the figure. They showed worlds covered with cities, then the same worlds empty and dead. They showed species of incredible diversity, then showed them disappearing, leaving nothing behind but silence. "We have witnessed the silence consume 10,000 civilizations. We have watched it devour species that had conquered death and mastered the fabric of reality. Nothing stops it. Nothing hides from it. It finds every thinking creature in the universe, and it destroys them all." The team sat in stunned silence. Yuna felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the Arctic ice above them. "We ran," the figure admitted. "We who had watched the universe for billions of years, we ran like frightened children. We came to this small world, hopping to hide among creatures too simple to attract the silence's attention. The great beasts of this world had no minds that could be detected. We thought we would be safe. But we were wrong." New images appeared. They showed the Watcher's ship landing on a young Earth, surrounded by dinosaurs that barely noticed their presence. They showed the Watchers building hidden stations, collecting samples, studying the planet's life. They looked peaceful, happy, safe. Then the images changed again. Dark shapes appeared in the sky. Not physical shapes, but something worse. Shadows that seemed to exist in the mind rather than in space. The Watchers tried to flee, but their ships would not respond. They tried to hide, but the shadows found them wherever they went. The silence had followed us. We led it directly to this world. In our desperation to escape, we had doomed an entire planet. The figure's voice cracked with grief. "We gathered in this chamber to die. There was nothing else we could do. The silence was already consuming our minds, drinking our thoughts like water. We had only moments left. But in our final hours, we discovered something that might change everything." The colors on the figure's body shifted to bright, hopeful gold. "The small creatures of this world. The warm-blooded ones that hid from the great beasts. Their minds were different. We scanned every creature on the planet, searching for somewhere to hide our thoughts, and we found that these small creatures were invisible. Not invisible to eyes, invisible to the silence." The team leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "We did not understand why. Something about their brain structure, something about the energy patterns of their thoughts. The silence could not detect them. They were perfectly hidden, perfectly silent, in a way that no other species in the galaxy had ever been. In our dying moments, we made a choice. We would shield this world. We would sacrifice what remained of our power to turn the silence's gaze away. We would give these small creatures a chance to evolve, to grow, to become something greater. The figure raised all four of its arms toward the sky. We did not save ourselves, but perhaps we saved the future. Perhaps one day the children of those small creatures would look up at the stars. Perhaps they would find this ship. Perhaps they would learn the truth. Perhaps they would be the ones to finally stand against the silence. The recording ended. The chamber fell into absolute quiet. Yuna looked around at her team. She saw Junho with tears streaming down his face. She saw Sujin staring at the dead watchers with new understanding. She saw Nari trembling as the weight of what she had translated settled onto her shoulders. She saw Minyu with his jaw set hard, already thinking about what this meant for the world above. "They died for us," Yuna said quietly. "They died so we could have a chance to exist." "But why?" Sujin asked. "Why would they sacrifice themselves for primitive mammals? They didn't even know if we would evolve into anything intelligent." Nari looked at the cube, still glowing softly on its platform. "There's more. They left more information about us, about what makes us different, about what they believed we could become." "Then we need to see all of it," Minyu said firmly. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Because if this silence is real, if it's still out there hunting minds." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Everyone understood what was at stake. The fate of humanity. The fate of all intelligent life in the universe. The weight of responsibility that had suddenly fallen onto their small team, buried in ice at the top of the world. Yuna stood up and faced the crystal cube. "Show us everything," she said. "Show us what we need to know." The cube began to glow brighter, and new images started to form in the air around them. The truth, all of it, was finally about to be revealed. Deeper into the ship they went, guided by lights that seemed to know where they wanted to go. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them to a section that felt different from the rest. The walls here were covered with strange containers, each one glowing with soft inner light. It was a laboratory, Junho realized, a place where the Watchers had done their scientific work. He approached one of the containers and peered inside. Floating in some kind of clear liquid was a small creature, perfectly preserved. It looked almost like a mouse, but its fur was different, its teeth were different. It was an animal from 65 million years ago, from a world that no longer existed. "Samples," Junho whispered with wonder. They collected samples from everything. There were thousands of containers, millions perhaps. Each one held a piece of ancient Earth, frozen in time. There were insects with wings like colored glass. There were fish with teeth that glowed in the dark. There were plants and fungi and creatures that Junho had never seen in any fossil record. The Watchers had preserved a complete picture of life on Earth before the Great Extinction. But it was not just Earth. As they explored further, they found containers from other worlds, creatures with 6 legs and crystalline skin, plants that seemed to be made of pure energy, beings so strange that Junho could not tell if they were animals or machines or something else entirely. The Watchers had cataloged life from across the galaxy. Nari found the data archives in a side chamber. Rows and rows of crystalline pillars stretched from floor to ceiling, each one containing more information than all the libraries on Earth combined. She touched one of the pillars, and instantly her mind was flooded with images and sounds and sensations. She saw star maps showing millions of worlds. She saw records of species that had risen to intelligence and built civilizations. She saw the slow, patient work of the Watchers as they documented everything, leaving nothing forgotten. And she saw what happened to all of them. One by one, the lights representing civilizations went dark. The silence found them. The silence consumed them. Entire species, some of them thousands of years more advanced than humanity, simply ceased to exist. Their cities crumbled. Their ships drifted empty in space. Their songs and stories and dreams were lost forever. 40,000, Nari said, her voice breaking. The Watchers surveyed over 40,000 intelligent species during their time in this galaxy. Every single one of them is now extinct. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 40,000 species, 40,000 civilizations, 40,000 attempts at consciousness and culture and meaning, all gone, all devoured by something that hunted minds across the darkness of space. But we're still here, Sujin said. Humans are still here. Why? The answer came from the archives. As Junho and Nari worked together to access more data, the truth slowly emerged. It was a truth that changed everything they thought they knew about themselves. Every intelligent species in the galaxy, without exception, eventually developed psychic abilities. It was a natural part of evolution. As brains grew more complex, they began to produce energy patterns that could affect the world around them. Telepathy, telekinesis, the ability to sense and communicate across vast distances. These powers emerged in every species, as predictable as the development of eyes or ears. And these powers made them visible to the silence. The silence did not hunt bodies, it hunted minds. It was drawn to the energy patterns produced by psychic awareness like a predator drawn to the scent of blood. The more powerful a species became mentally, the brighter they burned in the silence's perception, and the faster they were found and consumed. But humans were different. The Watchers' data showed that human brains had evolved along a completely unique path. Something about Earth's strong magnetic field, combined with the specific radiation produced by its sun, had created neural structures unlike anything else in the galaxy. Human minds were powerful, capable of complex thought and rich emotion, but they produced no psychic signature at all. Humans were invisible. In a galaxy full of glowing beacons crying out to the silence, humanity was a dark spot, perfectly hidden, completely silent. The silence could pass directly through the solar system and never know that intelligent life existed on the small blue planet orbiting its yellow sun. That's why they protected us, Yuna said slowly. That's why they gave their lives, because we're the only ones who could survive. But there was more. The Watchers had not just observed humanity's unique nature. They had studied it, analyzed it, and projected it into the future. Their predictions were startling. Human beings were not just invisible. They were also extraordinarily dangerous. The archives showed that humans possessed traits that were rare or absent in other intelligent species. They could adapt to almost any environment. They could recover from injuries that would kill other beings. They could cooperate in large groups, but they could also fight with terrifying ferocity. They could love with complete devotion, and they could hate with burning intensity. Other species in the galaxy had evolved toward peace and stability. Humans had evolved through constant struggle and conflict. They were survivors in a way that no other species could match. The Watchers had run simulations. If humanity survived long enough to reach the stars, if they developed the technology to travel between worlds, they would not simply flee from the silence like everyone else had done. They would fight. And according to the Watchers' calculations, they might actually win. They were betting on us, Minyu said, his voice filled with something that sounded like pride. They looked at every species in the galaxy, and they decided that humans were the best chance the universe had. We were just mammals hiding from dinosaurs, Junho said. We were nothing. How could they believe in us so strongly? The answer appeared in the archives, as if responding to his question. It was a recording made by one of the Watchers in their final hours, as the silence closed in around them. We have watched your ancestors for many cycles now, the alien said. They are small and weak with no claws or armor to protect them, yet they do not give up. When the cold comes, they find shelter. When food is scarce, they travel great distances to find more. When predators attack, they fight back with stones and sticks and their own bare hands. We have seen thousands of species face extinction. Almost all of them simply accepted their fate. They lay down and waited to die. But your ancestors refuse. They struggle. They adapt. They survive against all odds again and again and again. This is why we believe in them. Not because they are strong today, but because they will never stop trying to become stronger tomorrow. They will never accept defeat. They will never surrender to darkness. The silence has consumed everything in its path for billions of years. Nothing has ever stood against it and survived. But perhaps these small creatures, these impossible survivors, will be the ones to finally say no. It is a small hope, perhaps a foolish hope, but it is the only hope we have left. The recording ended. The team stood in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of what they had learned. They were not just humans anymore. They were the last hope of a universe filled with extinction. They carried the dreams of 40,000 dead species on their shoulders. They were the final bet of an ancient civilization that had watched the stars since before the sun was born. Yuna looked at her team. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. She saw determination. She saw the same stubborn refusal to surrender that the Watchers had seen in those ancient mammals. "They gave us a chance," she said. "They died believing we would become something greater. Are we going to prove them right?" Minyu straightened his spine and nodded. "We don't have a choice. We're going to fight." Sujin smiled grimly. "I didn't become an engineer to run away from problems. Let's figure out how to build whatever we need to win this thing." Junho looked at the preserved samples around them. The diversity of life in this ship. It's a treasure beyond measure. We have to protect it. We have to honor their sacrifice. Nari placed her hand on one of the archive pillars. All this knowledge, all these languages and stories and histories, they trusted us with everything they had. We can't let it be forgotten. Yuna felt tears in her eyes, but she did not look away. She looked at the bodies of the Watchers, still arranged in their final circle, and she made a silent promise. They would not die in vain. Whatever it took, however long it took, humanity would rise to meet the challenge that the Watchers had foreseen. They would carry the torch of consciousness into the darkness. They would stand against the silence. And they would not stop fighting until they won. The final chamber of the ship was the largest of all. It stretched upward like a cathedral, the ceiling lost in shadows far above. The walls were covered with technology that Sujin could barely begin to understand. Crystals and metals and materials that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. This was the Watcher's greatest gift to humanity. A technological archive containing everything they knew. The crystal pillars here were different from the ones in the research section. These were active, humming with power that had lasted for 65 million years. Each pillar contained complete schematics, detailed instructions, and working prototypes of technology that made human science look like cave paintings. There was faster-than-light travel. The Watchers had mastered the art of bending space, of creating shortcuts between distant stars. Their ships could cross the galaxy in weeks rather than centuries. There was energy generation that made nuclear power look primitive. They had learned to tap into the fundamental forces of the universe, drawing endless power from the fabric of reality itself. There were materials stronger than anything on Earth, lighter than air, harder than diamond, capable of reshaping themselves according to their owner's thoughts. And there were weapons. Minyu studied the military technology with a soldier's eye. There were devices that could disable enemy ships without destroying them. There were shields that could protect entire planets from attack. And there were weapons of last resort, devices capable of destroying stars or tearing holes in the fabric of space. "This is everything," Sujin whispered. They left us everything we would need to fight back. But there was also a warning. The final recording from the Watchers was not filled with hope, it was filled with caution. "We give you these tools because we believe in your potential," the alien figure said. "But we also fear what you might become. Your species has great capacity for both good and evil. The same stubbornness that keeps you alive can also lead you to terrible destruction. Use these gifts wisely. Use them to protect, not to conquer. Use them to build, not to destroy. Remember that you carry the hopes of every species that ever lived and died in this galaxy. Do not let our sacrifice be in vain. And remember one final truth. The silence is patient. It has consumed civilizations for billions of years. It will not come for you today or tomorrow. It may not come for thousands of years, but it will come eventually. It always does. When that day arrives, you must be ready. You must be united. You must stand together as one species, one planet, one voice crying out in the darkness. We believe you can do this. We believe you will do this. But the choice in the end is yours." The recording faded, and the chamber fell silent. Yuna looked at her team. They had spent weeks in this ship, learning secrets that had been hidden for millions of years. Now came the hardest part. They had to share these secrets with the world. The debates that followed would last for months. Yuna stood before the United Nations, presenting evidence that could not be denied. She showed them recordings of the Watchers. She showed them star maps and species catalogs. She showed them the terrible truth of the silence, and she showed them the miraculous gift of human invisibility. Some people refused to believe. They called it a hoax, a trick, a conspiracy designed to control the population. Religious leaders struggled to fit the revelations into their existing beliefs. Scientists argued about the implications for evolution and cosmology and physics. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ship was real. The technology was real. The bodies of the Watchers, studied by researchers from every nation, were undeniably alien. Slowly, grudgingly, the world began to accept the truth. Humans were not alone in the universe, but almost everything else that had ever achieved intelligence was now dead. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, a force of pure destruction waited for its next meal. The political battles were fierce. Some nations wanted to keep the technology for themselves. Some wanted to destroy it all, afraid of what humanity might become with such power. Some wanted to hide from the universe, to pretend the silence did not exist and hope it would never find them. Minyu argued against all of these positions. He stood before generals and presidents and prime ministers, making the case that had burned in his heart since he first understood what the Watchers had left behind. "We cannot hide," he said. "The Watchers tried to hide and the silence found them anyway. We cannot run. There is nowhere in the galaxy to run that the silence cannot eventually reach, and we cannot fight among ourselves. If we waste our energy on wars between nations, we will be too weak to face the real enemy when it comes. There is only one path forward. We must unite. All of humanity, all nations, all peoples. We must become one species, working together toward a common goal. We must reach for the stars not as Americans or Koreans or Russians, but as humans, as the last hope of intelligent life in the universe." His words did not convince everyone. Old hatreds and old fears did not disappear overnight, but they planted seeds. They started conversations. They made people think about what truly mattered. 10 years passed, then 20, then 50. The world changed more in those decades than it had in the previous 1,000 years. The technology from the Watcher's ship transformed every aspect of human life. Disease became a memory. Hunger disappeared. Energy was unlimited and clean. People lived longer, healthier, happier lives. And they built ships. The first human vessel capable of faster-than-light travel launched from Earth orbit on a bright summer day. It was named the Watcher's Hope, in honor of the aliens who had made it possible. Its crew included representatives from every nation on Earth, working together as a single team. They traveled to nearby star systems and found the ruins of ancient civilizations, just as the archives had predicted. Empty cities, abandoned ships, silent monuments to species that had once dreamed and loved and created art and music. The crews of those early expeditions returned home with heavy hearts, but also with renewed determination. This would not happen to humanity. They would not let it. More ships were built. More crews were trained. Humanity spread out into the galaxy like seeds blown by a cosmic wind. They colonized empty worlds. They built space stations around distant stars. They created a civilization that spanned dozens of light years, connected by technology that turned the impossible into the everyday. And always they prepared. Hidden in secret locations across human space, weapons were constructed, shields were built, defensive systems were designed and tested and improved. Nobody talked about the silence in everyday conversation, but everyone knew it was out there, waiting. Everyone knew that someday the fight would come. On the day of the colony's ship Silent Hope's launch, an elderly woman watched from her home in Busan, Korea. Her name was Una Park and she was 97 years old. Her hair was white, her face was lined with age, but her eyes were still sharp and clear. She remembered the day she had first seen that impossible shape beneath the Arctic ice. She remembered the fear and wonder of stepping inside the ancient ship. She remembered the faces of her team, young and eager and brave, as they uncovered secrets that had been hidden for millions of years. Most of them were gone now. Junho had died 10 years ago, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, still talking about the incredible organisms he had studied throughout his life. Nari had passed away peacefully in her sleep, her final work being a comprehensive dictionary of the Watcher language that would help future generations understand the alien archives. Sujin had lived long enough to see her engineering designs become the foundation of an interstellar civilization. Only Minyu still lived, though he was even more ancient than Yuna. He had become a symbol of human unity, traveling from world to world even in his old age, reminding people of the mission that had brought them together. Yuna watched the Silent Hope rise into the sky, its hull gleaming in the sunlight. Inside were 10,000 humans, heading for a distant world that would become their new home. They carried with them the DNA of millions of Earth species, the cultural treasures of 1,000 generations, and the unbreakable hope that had carried humanity from the African plains to the stars. She thought about the Watchers, those ancient beings who had given everything so that her species might have a chance. She thought about the 40,000 civilizations that had fallen to the silence, their songs silenced forever, their stories lost in the void. And she thought about what the Watchers had seen in those small mammals hiding from dinosaurs. Not strength or power or genius, just stubborn, relentless determination. The refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. The Silent Hope disappeared into the sky, carrying its cargo of dreams toward the unknown. More ships would follow. More worlds would be settled. More humans would be born among alien stars, looking up at unfamiliar constellations and knowing that they were part of something vast and beautiful and important. Somewhere out in the darkness between galaxies, the silence waited. It was patient. It was eternal. It had consumed everything that had ever dared to think and dream and hope. But for the first time in billions of years, something was coming that it could not see. Something was spreading through the galaxy, invisible and determined and absolutely unwilling to die. Something that carried the legacy of 40,000 extinct species and the desperate hope of an ancient civilization. Humanity was coming, and they were not afraid. Yuna smiled and closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over her face. She had done her part. Now it was time for the next generation to carry the torch. The story of humanity was just beginning, and she knew with absolute certainty that it would be a story worth telling. They had been watching the stars since the dawn of time, dreaming of what might lie beyond the horizon. Now they were finally going to find out. And nothing, not even the silence itself, would stop them.